There's 10 players you'll regret leaving on your waiver wire in week 4, but if this is your first time here, I'm Joe. I've helped thousands of people just like you win their fantasy league over the last decade, and I plan to do the same for you in this video. I start off every video by delivering some value and getting you guys involved. Then we get into today's one key topic, so feel free to skip ahead, but let's get right into it. We can't talk about news for fantasy football owners without starting with CeeDee Lamb and this ankle injury. It looks like he's going to be out for the next 3 to 4 weeks. Obviously, a huge bummer for fantasy owners that have CeeDee. Also, this offense in general might take a little bit of a step back. Maybe we get some more targets for George Pickens. Maybe we get some more Ferguson love. Definitely a knock in terms of if you're running out Dak Prescott as your QB1. Not great. We'll keep you guys in the loop there. In terms of not great, Nick Bosa suffered a season-ending torn ACL in Sunday's win over Arizona, so he's going to need season-ending surgery. Anytime we lose like a really strong defensive player here, we just saw it, obviously not with an injury, but Micah Parsons leaving the Dallas Cowboys. This offense in general might get a few more opportunities when they're behind in games, so we'll see if this ends up being a positive fantasy thing for the 49ers and some of their weapons, but they just can't seem to get super healthy as well. But obviously best wishes to Bosa. Brian Daboll, they're evaluating everything when it comes to their quarterback. I haven't heard Daboll say one nice thing about Russell Wilson, so I still think there's a chance that Jackson Dart does get a start here sooner than later with how this team has been playing. We'll see, but we're going to be monitoring that one for sure from a fantasy perspective. Just wanted to flag this for people that haven't been paying attention. Jordan Addison eligible to return from suspension in week 4 against the Steelers. So if he's on your waiver wire for some crazy reason, go get Jordan Addison. He's going to be a big-time player for this offense the rest of the way. Ian Rappaport talking about Todd Bowles and this Mike Evans update. Looks like it's a low-grade injury, not expected to be a season ender or anything like that. From a hamstring point of view, always concerning with guys like Mike Evans, but it looks like the initial diagnosis, he might miss a little bit of time, but it's not going to be something that's long-term, so that's positive. In terms of the non-positive sides of things, I feel like we have a lot of injuries to go through today, but James Conner did, in fact, have a season-ending ankle injury. Didn't look good on film, didn't look good live. We will see Trey Benson take over as Arizona's lead back. We'll talk about that later on in the program, but obviously a bummer for James Conner owners. Mac Jones, that PCL sprain that he's been kind of dealing with since camp, it looks like he did tweak it a little bit in the game. He's had a knee brace on, but was still able to lead the team to a game-winning drive, but has looked pretty hobbled at times. So we'll see if Brock Purdy is able to return next week, or we could see Adrian Martinez make his NFL debut. So more of like a super flex spot here to be paying attention to, but this offense in general a little bit in flux. And then obviously losing Nick Bosa on the other side, you feel for 49ers fans right now. Let's talk about this. Torn Achilles likely for Najee Harris. They fear that that is the injury, that non-contact injury that we saw in the second quarter. Jim Harbaugh said that the team expects bad news once the tests are finalized. So most likely Najee Harris done for the year. Maybe you have him in Hampton. Maybe that's a situation that looks pretty good from a fantasy perspective. He's someone that we've been talking about trading for as well most of the first couple weeks here. So maybe you got him. And if you did, you're in a pretty good position to be the bell cow in LA. This one's pretty brutal. Obviously, the James Conner thing that we're working through, not good. There was another one that I wanted to touch on here as well, but didn't have a graphic for. Tyrone Tracy, it looks like he is going to be out for a while as well. Left with a shoulder injury in week 3, racked up 9 touches before taking that big hit from Nick Bolton. If Tracy misses time, Cam Skattebo is the one that I'd be focused on as the next man up. He's been scoring touchdowns as well. Pretty hard to bring down, but definitely an asset in fantasy that we would be paying attention to. If he's on your waiver wire, go grab Skattebo. I always want to reward some of the best questions that I get on these YouTube videos. So if you have any questions or you want my take on a certain situation, definitely drop that below and I'll do my best to answer the best ones. We're going to go through 5 of them today and then a couple other things that I want to flag. Looking for content and you're answering questions, don't start with the questions, end with them. Not interested in that. Hey man, totally cool if you don't want to listen through the Q&A stuff. I try and mention at the intro that you can just skip ahead if you're just here for the waiver wire targets. It's pretty easy just to skip ahead, my man. But I like to do the news just to give you guys some fantasy stuff up top and provide some value, but then also answer some of these questions just to get you guys a little bit more involved. And yeah, transparently, getting more comments on these videos does boost the engagements and the views overall. So it's something that I am prioritizing just to make sure that I'm helping you guys out, but then also trying to build a little bit of community. People come back to these videos, ask questions, get them answered. That's the goal, my man. So fast forwarding is totally encouraged if this is where you're at. Cool. Let's talk through, would you trade Pearsall for a second rounder and Jacoby Myers? Yeah, I would personally. I don't value some of these like second, third round picks in Dynasty as highly as others. I'm usually in the camp of get some of your best players through trades as well, some of the active players, especially the second and third round guys. I think if you can upgrade from a Ricky Pearsall to Jacoby Myers, I would absolutely be doing something like that. We don't talk as much about Dynasty this time of the year, but we do talk a lot more about Dynasty, obviously, in the offseason and then in the Fantasy Accelerator membership, which I can get into in a second. What are your rest of season wide receiver rankings? Full PPR, London, Devontae Adams, and Sutton. Yeah, I took a look at this. We do have a rest of seasons ranking sheet in the Fantasy Accelerator. But for me, I would rank these Drake London, Devontae Adams, and then Cortland Sutton for me. Kyron Williams or Jordan Mason, who should I start in full PPR? Yeah, so I try and keep the start sits to, again, the membership, Fantasy Accelerator membership, but I also am going to be flagging here that I'm going to be doing a Sunday morning live stream. So it's going to be starting, I already have a live stream that's every Sunday at 9 a.m. Eastern time, but that's mostly DraftKings and FanDuel stuff. I'm going to do kind of like an Ask Me Anything, start sits, all of that at 10:15 Eastern time starting this week. So would love to see you guys there for the live stream, talk through some start sits then. Cool. Trade away Pollard for Henderson and Caleb Williams. Yeah, I looked at this one. Obviously, I'm a pretty big Travion Henderson fan. So Henderson versus Pollard in a vacuum, I think, is a pretty decent side to take. Also, Caleb Williams, if you have some quarterback issues and you need someone, I think I like that side better. Caleb Williams, Travion Henderson for Pollard. That makes sense for me. I think that in general, the Titans offense hasn't been as efficient as we would like to see. So yeah, if you can move Pollard for a quarterback position need and someone that's like kind of a lateral move, but still has some upside like Henderson, I would absolutely do that. We talked about the start sit show. Yeah, so we're all good there. I traded AJ Brown for London. Yeah, this is an interesting one. AJ Brown is someone that I wasn't necessarily targeting in fantasy this year. Story as old as time. We're worried about the offensive play volume on the passing side of things with Philly, though AJ Brown obviously just had a really strong game. I think over 100 yards and a touchdown. I'm still a believer in Drake London, so I'm okay with this trade, my man. I don't mind it. I don't mind it. Still like the Drake London stuff. We talked about him a little bit last week. I think there's a chance that offense still gets in a better position. They get shut out last week. Not ideal, but there's still a lot to like for London, I think, this year in terms of his ceiling. But if you would like to get all of your questions answered by me specifically, fantasyaccelerator.com, check it out. It's my membership community. It's basically a 3-legged prong system here. We got the draft season, we got in season, and we got off season, right? So everything you need in season for you to win your draft, fantasyaccelerator.com. Or if you just want the rankings, top150free.com, put your email in here. I'll send you my top 150 rankings for that week, and we can go from there. Cool. All right, today's one key topic, 10 must-add players in fantasy football before week 4. Guys that you'll regret leaving on your waiver wire. So we're going to whiteboard this out per usual. Let's come all the way down here. And we're going to start with the number 1 player that I'd be adding on your waiver wire if he is available. Obviously, he is alluded to on the thumbnail, and we talked about him a little bit in the news session. But let's talk about Trey Benson. The number 1 pickup across the board, in my opinion, this week. I think pretty clearly, anytime you lose a bell cow running back like James Conner, we're going to be trying to figure out who the handcuff is, who's the guy that's had some standalone value for us so far. So Trey Benson, about 54.8% of leagues he's available in. So we'll start there. If for some reason Trey Benson is in your league, obviously Conner going down is a huge opportunity for Benson, right? So James Conner left week 3 with that ankle injury. Benson next man up, 10 carries for 42 yards, 3 catches for 9 more yards. So he's already kind of showed the team that he can handle both the run game and also as a receiver. So he's someone that I don't think we need to really like overreact to that modest box score. The real story here has been like the snap share and then obviously the clear starting role now that Conner is out. And I think one of the things too, the red zone role, but also this schedule. The Cardinals have a really favorable schedule in the run game, and then they do run the ball in the red zone quite a bit already. So you're buying into the NFL's 6th easiest rushing schedule, softer fronts, friendly, I guess more friendly efficiency, you can call it, and then a lot more goal line cracks, obviously. This is a situation already where we knew they really liked Trey Benson. So I didn't have a ton of shares of Connor, thankfully, mostly because they were talking about this being like a 1A, 1B situation for most of the year anyway. So I think the scheme really fits what they're trying to do here. And what they want to do is run the ball more efficiently. And what Benson's been able to do is kind of give us that quiet efficiency already. He's a player that runs like a 4.39 40, so he's someone that already has a ton of speed. Obviously, 4.6 yards per carry as a rookie. He showed some real juice on really limited chances overall. He was 15th in true yards per carry with 5.1 yards per touch, not empty touches, right? So I think that's really positive. 36.5% of his 63 carries last year went for 5+ yards. So the chunk runs are kind of already in his profile. So that quiet efficiency is something that I look for if you're trying to grab a guy that has a little bit more upside, not just the role. And again, the buy-in that we've gotten from the coaches has been pretty useful, even just dating into the offseason, right? So I think that Jonathan Gannon saying that Benson can light it up and that Arizona are like, this is some of the stuff they said in the offseason, that Arizona had 2 number 1 backs, right? So I like that. He's kind of a guy that like 50% of rosters, right? So this doesn't help everyone, but if he happens to be out there, this is someone that I'd be not necessarily unloading the fab for, like unloading the clip, but I think you can pretty aggressively target him with 30-40% of that fab budget and feel pretty good about it, because he really is going to be the cheapest path to 20, the cheapest path, I think, to 20+ touches. And we don't get these opportunities on the waiver wire every week, right? So to me, add Trey Benson now if he's available. If Connor ends up coming back next year, we'll talk about that from a dynasty perspective. But I do think that Trey Benson is a nice guy that I guess for a lot of people might end up being somewhat of a league winner at this point of the season. So let's get into it. And we're going to start with number 10. We'll always start with number 1. I think number 1 is usually the most obvious pickup, right? So it's a guy that you guys already know, but also is not available in every league. So then we're going to go top to bottom here. So number 10, wide receiver. We're going to talk mostly running backs and wide receivers today. Malik Washington. So Malik Washington is currently owned in 1% of leagues. 1.3% rostered currently. So let's talk about him. Why is that a guy that we'd be targeting? This Miami offense in general, right? So to me, he's kind of like that locked in wide receiver 3 on a bad team. So a team that is going to be forced to pass because of necessity, essentially, right? But the nice thing about Malik Washington is he's actually getting some designed runs. So he has already kind of like this gadget role, which is really nice when you're trying to like piece together what your flex looks like in fantasy if you get in some injury trouble or once the bye weeks hit, all of those things. There's multiple ways for him to get there, right? And I think even in the passing game, the target tree here is narrowing. So only 4 Dolphins have top 20 targets last year. Jonnu's obviously was at 17. He's gone. 7% of the TDs also were vacated there. But I think in general, if you want to try and find an upside play, it was basically who is the guy next to like Hill, Waddle, Achane, because there's always a lot of opportunities for like who's going to be like that ancillary player. If this team is always going to be down and always going to be throwing, we need to find someone that can get there in an emergence type of profile in this offense. So I do like that kind of quite a bit. So what we're basically talking about here is some tailwinds of the environment. And like what I mean by that is basically this team is already running a ton of plays per game, 63 per game, roughly. 61% of them have been passed. So if we're going to get 61% pass rate there on like a really easy schedule as well. So we have a top 8 schedule for the passing game. And the defense looks like it might be one of the worst in the entire NFL, right? So we're right there with like the Bears, the Cowboys, these teams like they're basically going to be playing from behind almost all the time. So it's going to lead to more shootouts. It's going to lead to more passing volume, and they're going to be chasing points, right? So these these type of guys, if we happen to see an injury to Tyreek, Waddle, whoever it may be, those are the situations where I want to have that option, especially as someone that's being used and it has like basically standalone value now. These are the type of guys that end up being really big difference makers for your team if a player goes down, right? So to me, we need to get him in. Basically, he ends up being like a priority stash. So he's a better option for teams that might be 3-0 at this point. If you can afford to basically burn a roster spot on a guy like this, I think it makes a lot of sense because in general, as like they get designed more touches, there's like a really clear path to a sudden volume increase. Then you back into a player like this as a wide receiver, you can toss in your flex, and there's still a lot of upside there, and there's a lot of room for growth. The number 9 player that I would be prioritizing this week on the waiver wire, Rico Dowdle. Let's talk about Rico Dowdle. It feels like a while since Rico Dowdle has been super relevant. Didn't do a ton for us in Dallas, but now that he's in Carolina, I do think there's some opportunity here. And the first thing is that his touches are climbing. Touches are climbing week by week, uptick from like basically up to week 1 up to 10.8 PPR points. The usage and the red zone trust is kind of what I'm looking at here for things going in the right direction. If that trend basically, I think that trend basically puts him at like a short list of backs who can turn like a bench spot into like a spot start type of value, even if there isn't an injury in this backfield, right? But again, some of the things I'm prioritizing right here at this point of the season are these soft matchups. So we'll see what Carolina ends up being if they're one of the better teams in the league when it comes to I mean, basically, just saw them put up 30 points, win 30-0, but they also haven't been very good to start the year. So we'll see. Some of that has to do with like their offensive line and really just returning all of their best starters. So when they're all in the field and they're all healthy, I think that the matchups, like I'm saying, soft matchups, but also the efficiency boost that they get with that offensive line, I think this is still a backfield we want to be invested in. So positive game script. Positive game script, I think, obviously we talked through that 30-0 win in week 3, but he got 10 carries and a touchdown. That's exactly kind of the usage that you want when they're controlling games. You want those guys that are going to be trusted in the red zone. You also want guys that are going to be able to milk the clock for the team, and they basically have him listed as that clear backup to Chuba, but the touches have been kind of rising every week, so I'm a little bit more down on Chuba and a little bit more, I guess, positive on Rico at this point. We still want to target, we talked about this in the draft, we want to target those ambiguous backfields. We still want to do that early in the season because, as we just saw, for the Cardinals, anything can happen, right? So this is one that might be borderline for some of you because he's only about 5% owned right now. But again, if you can afford to drop someone on your roster and keep them there for a little bit of time, I think that Rico Dowdle is now like just like a really bullish bench stash to me. There's a lot of reasons to him being on this video going forward, but I think 5% is still a reasonable time to grab him if you can help it. Let's talk about another wide receiver, Trey Tucker. This is someone that we probably could have put a little bit early in the video, but again, I'm trying to go from top to bottom here outside of the number 1 ad, which is pretty clearly going to be Benson. But Trey Tucker just lights the world on fire this past week, right? So he's only 2%. He's going to be one of the top waiver ads in your league. Almost anyone that's watching this video, they probably have Trey Tucker on their waiver wire. So the question becomes, do you want to burn a waiver priority to get him? And I would say yes. And let's talk about why. So the Raiders in general are an up-tempo team and a team that has a really high pass rate. Two things we really want. So 57 of 63 snaps as the wide receiver 2 in week 1. This offense is projected to play faster, obviously, with Chip Kelly. So more routes, more chances, Geno Smith. I guess if you even look back to Pete Carroll and Geno Smith together in Seattle, their last couple of years were more throw heavy than people realize. So I think it's not that much of a surprise that that same DNA has kind of been powering Vegas when at least game script gets to a spot where they're needing to push the pace a little bit. So pass rate is projected around like 61%, roughly, depending on where the game scripts lie. Pretty tough division in general. But we already saw the week 3 ceiling. So any type of wide receiver right now that we're going to be prioritizing on the waiver wire, I want to see a path to massive upside, right? So through 3 weeks right now, Trey Tucker, 13 for 211 and 4 through 3 weeks. So if we have a ceiling like this already, I do think it's a situation where it's not just like a one-off type of game. I know we just had that big blow up, but to me, the production in general is stacking a little bit. So I think if you get like these Geno bombs, he's obviously not scared to go over the top. Trey Tucker is someone that could be taking advantage of that for quite a while. But I think we need to, like, I guess, acknowledge that there's been a little bit of a perception flip. Basically, that vertical type of offense that we didn't know if we were going to see here, I think this is already something that we can basically expect going forward. So it's not just like a one-off. So week 2, that dud, he still hit 91% of the snaps and had 8 targets. So the usage held with Trey Tucker even when the box score didn't. That's exactly what we're looking for, right? So he ran a ton of routes last season. So he's already been a full-time player for quite some time. So I think we're kind of just waiting for the market to catch up. And I want to be early on players like this. In general, you probably didn't have them. We had the big blow up here, but I still think it's early enough to where if you wanted to kind of burn a little bit of a higher waiver priority and you need wide receiver help, I wouldn't kill you for that. Let's talk about a guy that still is having, I guess, more work as the season goes on. Blake Corum. We talked about him a little bit last week, but let's talk through this. If you didn't get him last week, I think we had him in the running back video. He's another guy that I'd be prioritizing. 11% of rosters have Blake Corum on them currently, or 11% of leagues, I should say. So why are we prioritizing him? So to me, anytime we see like real efficiency on not a lot of work or a lot of volume, it's a really nice situation, right? So 8 carries to Kyron's 20 in week 3, but Corum is the one that ripped off 6.6 yards per carry as like that kind of change of pace back. So to me, why that matters is like in a near balanced Rams offense, like they don't pass a ton, that kind of like per carry pop can force more touches basically. And in terms of pops, we got back-to-back pops for Corum. Back-to-back pops. So week 2, 5 for 44 and a touchdown. McVay's already talked about it in the offseason of him being explosive. They have a lot of trust in him. We'll continue to see that, all of that. So I think that McVay's like, if McVay keeps saying things like, we have 2 backs, we feel really good about these guys. It's a really stable RB2 role already, but there's like some room to breathe here, right? So I think there's some hidden upside with Corum. And I haven't heard a lot of people talk about him as like a primary ad, but these are the type of backfields that I really like, right? Because if touches like diversify a little bit more, Corum already has like that in-game efficiency. So if they end up absorbing, or I guess if they end up giving him some more opportunities, he's the one that can turn efficiency into more volume, which turns into like these big outsized outcomes, right? So you want to be in before the role grows. Classic spot that we've seen a million times, but people still want to ignore him. Like I said, 11% on the waiver wire, or on 11% of leagues he's available. Blake Corum. Let's talk through another wide receiver. Another wide receiver. You guys know who this is? You guys know who this is? Elic Ayomanor. God, I thought I was going to nail the name this time. Elic Ayomanor. Ayomanor. I don't know why this name's so hard for me, but I'm going to try. I'm going to keep working on it. By the end of the season, Elic Ayomanor. I have it written down literally on how to say it, and I still can't do it. Anyways, let's get into this. He probably has already been picked up in your league, but I would feel weird not talking about a guy who's only 21% owned right now with this type of profile and this type of production so far. So Elic Ayomanor. That was pretty good. Week 1, 25% target share, 48% target or air yard share in that one. So day 1, elite usage. A lot of the same reasons that we really liked Calvin Ridley, we've basically seen Ayomanor take that over. So a little bit quiet on the box score, but again, behind Ridley, there's a nice runway here for like wide receiver 2 snaps. And we've seen that. Back-to-back touchdowns. So if someone is just sorting by fantasy points, that might be that 21% of leagues that have already picked him up. But to me, it's kind of like anytime we see these like rookie to rookie correlations, right? So Cam Ward, anytime we see like the chemistry start to evolve with these rookies together, I think is kind of a nice high leverage opportunity. And then I think, again, there's some tailwinds here. I talk about tailwinds a lot, right? Because we have a lot of things that we can sift through from a volume perspective, but matchups as well, but offensive lines kind of being mid-tier. We got to find something here, right? And to me, there's really not a lot of depth overall. So behind Ridley, there's not a lot, right? So he's already second in targets. He's already leading the team in air yards through 2 games. And I think there's just like the wide receiver 2 stash category of waiver wire pickup that you should be considering, right? And if you are considering one of those guys, to me, you want 2 things. You want splash plays and you want TDs. You want a guy that can get downfield, chunk yardage, but you also want a guy that can score touchdowns. So to me, I'm super bullish on this, this wide receiver core in general because it's so narrow. And if this ends up being a situation where Cam Ward starts to play a little bit better, these are the type of players that I want on my bench to take advantage of. Speaking of bench guys to take advantage of, someone that we've been talking about a decent amount, you guys know how I feel about Devon Achane, but what about Ollie Gordon? So Ollie Gordon goes out there, scores again last week. What percentage of rosters do you think, or what percentage of leagues do you think have him? 23% of leagues have him rostered. So red zone role has already showed up. That's kind of the main thing, right? What were they talking about in the offseason with Achane that they were worried about? Or what have they not been able to do well? It's kind of been like around the goal line, finishing off drives, like having a real hammer like Raheem Mostert used to be, right? Tua is also like not a threat for rushing TDs, which is really nice. So if this team's going to project for like 20 to 25 rushes per game, there's still room for like a short yardage hammer red zone player. And these are guys that are super useful during the bye weeks as well. If you end up getting this in a position where you get a touchdown from someone when you really need kind of that spot start, right? So I think that the role clarity at this time of the year is really useful as well. If we have an injury, of course, yes, he's going to go in there and take up a lot more volume. But Achane last week, 9 targets, Gordon had 0. So he's not being used in the passing game at all, but he is being used in the red zone, like the green zone, even if he's not getting that receiving volume. So anytime there's like a clear role for both sides, it's actually good for both sides. So he's kind of like that TD handcuff. Like, again, I mentioned Mostert before. He's like that exact archetype, right? So I think that this offense is kind of set up to be behind in a lot of games, but that doesn't mean that they're not going to score touchdowns or at least have the opportunity to score touchdowns. And if there's a role that can kind of soak up a good chunk of that, I think it's at least interesting on the waiver wire. I think we need to start talking about the trend shift here for Miami. So, and what I mean by that is week 3's 9 carries nearly doubled his combined weeks 1 through 2. So a clear spike to me that like the staff they're grasping at straws, right? They're testing everything. They're trying to figure out what this offense's identity is going to be. And he's looked extremely powerful. I think they've mentioned that already in the press. So that 16-yard burst flashed enough juice to kind of just earn that continued early down work. So obviously they lost 31-21 against Buffalo, but even in defeat, Miami opened by feeding Gordon at the goal line. So I think we can see that a lot more going forward. So he's kind of like a TD dependent flex, but there's some upside here. if there is going to be injuries or if this offense starts to play any better, they can't get much worse, right? So I think there's that. In terms of an offense that has not been that good, that things can only go up, let's talk about Christian Kirk. Houston Texans. Nico gets on track a little bit this past week. You love to see that. But in terms of, they still need of like a true number 2 there right now. So Christian Kirk, he's rostered on 21% of leagues right now. So basically, he returns from this injury and has an immediate role. Anytime I see that, the bat signals go off a little bit, right? So he earned 8 targets in week 3, 3 for 25. So not a crazy amount of yardage, obviously, but that usage is what we're looking for after coming off of that hamstring injury. So immediately when he's suited up, they go to him a lot, right? So he has a real role. So that steady like slot presence from Christian Kirk is solid because he fills the gap, right? And to me, there's been a little bit of a scheme shift here for Houston. Little bit of a scheme shift. So more slot snaps in general for like these 3 wide receiver sets. We didn't see a ton of that before, but there's really been like more of an emphasis on like these high percentage throws, a little bit of play action, exactly where the slot volume starts to stack a little bit. And the offensive line is a complete liability. So the O-line being a complete liability actually helps the shorter to intermediate passing game. So these slot snaps and these slot targets are extremely valuable, right? So the projections really, if you can have him for like that target share, so like I mentioned, he had 8 targets on his return. The projection of those targets and the offensive line concerns, they end up being pretty bankable targets and bankable volume in PPR leagues that are really interesting going forward if you're trying to really just have like a steady option to plug in through the bye weeks. So to me, he's a priority add if he's available. And just mostly because of the role and also just the state of this offensive line in general, I don't think that role is going anywhere. Couple more guys to talk through today. Couple guys that, if they're available in your league, I would be running, not walking, to grab them at this point. So we talked about him last week. I'm going to mention him again because he's still available in over 50% of leagues. Bhayshul Tuten. How many times do I've been told you to draft him in the offseason, told you to grab him in week 1, told you to grab him in week 2. But let's map this out for a second. Bhayshul Tuten. Why do we want him, right? He's the clear RB2. They trade away Tank Bigsby, obviously paves the way for Tuten to see more volume as that change of pace back. Back-to-back TDs. He's explosive, right? So despite not being used a ton, he is kind of like gaining that red zone trust, and that usage has been real. So that shoulder issue doesn't look like he had any injury designation going into week 3. So he's healthy enough to be kind of deployed in those high leverage situations when needed, right? So we like that. Week 2, he had 2 catches for 32 yards, that receiving TD. So he's definitely like a dual threat type of option, and really just like the perfect fit for this Cohen style. Right? So Liam Cohen's offense led the NFL in EPA per play on screens to running backs. They were the 3rd highest high value, or they were the 3rd highest volume team in those terms of touches last year, right? So backup running backs can still post like usable fantasy starts with that type of like schemed volume, right? So Jacksonville also is an up-tempo team, 62 plays per game roughly. They're passing at a 61% clip, so more snaps, more chances for the RB2 to actually matter, right? And then again, another offensive line that's not very good. So these dump offs are definitely going to be basically a feature, not a bug for guys like Tuten. I honestly think this is probably the last week you have a chance to stash him. So I'm going to stop including him in these videos. I think just the macro projections of this backfield in general, if the carries end up being kind of near even with ETN, I want the younger, more explosive player, right? So when he's healthy, he's had 2 touchdowns in 2 weeks. He's locked in as that RB2. He's kind of an immediate bye week cover type of contingency play, but he does have league winning upside. No doubt about that. The number 2 player that I'd be picking up, again, Trey Benson would be my number one waiver ad this week. But if we're talking about a guy that's still available in about 40% of leagues for some reason, it's Darnell Mooney. And we talked about him in the offseason a ton as well. So I hope in your league you either have him or you can go grab him now. You have the flexibility to do that. But Darnell Mooney, again, even in a 30-0 shutout, he still had 11 targets. So the role is real. He's like the clear wide receiver too. But it's a very different role than Drake London, right? It's like a bankable, like deep shot role. So week 2 was obviously quiet, 4 targets, 2 for 20, but then the volume spiked in week 3. Again, we're looking for these volume spikes, especially in situations like this where they really need someone to step up. So this offense in general, fast-paced, but underperforming. So they're going to be like a top 10 pace team. They also have the 6th easiest passing schedule, more snaps, softer coverages. Again, we're talking about these macro environments in general, and we're trying to find guys that could be difference makers for us down the stretch. So the downfield archetype. The story as old as time. We want difference makers, right? So he was 10th in deep targets last year, 13th in yards per catch, 6th in explosive play rating. So his role is really that vertical, high leverage role in general. So if you want to find like a guy that's actually going to give you like some concentrated usage tree upside, I still think that Mooney is like a huge priority going into week 4 and a must add if available. And I don't say must add very often. That's it for now. Tomorrow we're talking trade targets. So hit subscribe, drop a comment. I read every single one. See you then.